Welcome, everybody. I can have your attention. We will get started with tonight's program. Welcome to the Security and Strategy program here at SMU for tonight's special program on whether or not cyber war is coming. Now, we're at an anniversary of sorts. About 20 years ago, there was a famous study that came out of the RAND Corporation with the provocative title, Cyber War is Coming. Right? This was 1996 when the report was issued. 1996, this is before Google, before Facebook, before Twitter, before all of the things that we now view as commonplace. It was before we did our banking and shopping online. Right? It was before military organizations communicated with each other on nets. They did a little bit, but nothing like the way they do today. The report was also, more ominously, written long before an intelligence chief referred to China's theft of intellectual property as the most significant transfer of wealth in history. It was before U.S. adversaries like North Korea and Iran started acting in cyberspace against U.S. interest, and it was long before Russia allegedly tried to use cyberspace to manipulate an American presidential election. All of this sounds and feels very, very worrisome. Right? It suggests that weaker powers could use this new technological domain to undermine traditional sources of American power and influence, its economy, its military might. The United States, of course, was not standing idly by while all this was going on. Right? It was also investing heavily in its own cyber capabilities, both defensive and offensive. And indeed, it's probably true that no country has invested more time, effort, and money in cyberspace than has the United States. Okay? Seen in this light, the United States might actually be well positioned to take advantage of these technological innovations. Right? It has large organizations devoted to cybersecurity. It has an immense amount of resources and technological expertise. Maybe the cyber revolution benefits the United States more than its adversaries. Now, this debate, who benefits most from cyber technologies, is far from settled. It's an intense, ongoing question among scholars, analysts, and people in the policy community. What is clear is that cyber technologies are playing an increasingly important role in international politics. They facilitate communications, they enable diplomacy, but they are also means for which states can attack one another. Cyberspace is not just a domain of cooperation and the exchange of ideas, it's also a place where nation states compete. And it might be a place where nation states actually come into direct confrontation. Right? They might actually start to fight wars in cyberspace, as the RAND study from 1996 predicted. Right? So this raises a whole bunch of really interesting questions. Right? How does the explosion of these technologies and the creation of this whole new domain affect how we think about warfare? Right? Affect how we think about the traditional use of military force for political purposes? Does the cyber revolution make war more likely or less likely? Does it make war more risky or less risky? These are really important questions because there's a lot of lives and a lot of money and a lot of national power on the line based on the answers. Unfortunately, the answers are very, very tricky. They're not simple questions, and the answers are not likely to be wholly satisfying. Now, fortunately, we have with us tonight two of the world's experts on cyber technology, cybersecurity, and the relationship between these technologies and military operations with us. Both are unique in another respect, is that they're one of just a small number of people who can actually talk about the politics of military force, but can also do the technological deep dive. Right? These people know ones and zeros far better than I do. Right? I'm amazed at what they know. Right? Dr. Jacqueline Schneider comes to us from the Center for Naval Warfare Studies at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. She's also a faculty member of the Center for Cyber Conflict Studies. She researches the intersection of technology, national security, and political psychology with a special interest in cyber and unmanned technologies, and Northeast Asia, where there have been some things happening recently, and we might want to get into that in discussion. Her published work has appeared in many places. You'll have read her in the Washington Post, the National Interest, a host of other journals and media outlets. Before beginning her academic career, she spent 6 years as an Air Force officer in South Korea and Japan, and is currently a reservist assigned to U.S. Cyber Command. On her right, Dr. Jon Lindsay is professor of digital media and global affairs at the University of Toronto, where he also serves as director of the Trudeau Center for Peace, Conflict, and Justice. And he teaches a variety of courses on global security, intelligence, and grand strategy, with a focus on the impact of technology on traditional issues. He is the editor of a recent book, China and Cybersecurity, Espionage, Strategy, and Politics in the Digital Domain. And he has a forthcoming book called Shifting the Fog of War, Information Technology and the Politics of Control. Like Dr. Schneider, Dr. Lindsay also has a military background. He served in the U.S. Navy with assignments in Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East before returning to the Ivory Tower. The way we will do this tonight is we will do about 20-minute presentations, first with Dr. Lindsay and then with Dr. Schneider, and then we'll open up to Q&A. So please join me in welcoming our speakers today.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Josh. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. I actually spent the first 5 years of my life in Amarillo, so it's nice to be back in Texas. Josh has mentioned right at the beginning that, gosh, it's almost 20 years since that famous Jon R. Is Cyberwar Coming article came out. Made me start to reflect that while we think of cyberspace, cybersecurity as a new thing, really these issues have been with us for quite a long time. It's already 200 years that we've had instantaneous communication across very long distances with the telegraph. We've had radio wireless communications for over a century. The internet is actually 50 years old. The World Wide Web is 25 years old. We've had electronic warfare interactions for 75 years, right? Debuted in the Battle of Britain. So we've been dealing with issues of electronic communications, both how to secure those communications, how to listen in on others, and how they might interact with other more traditional forms of warfighting and interaction. Now, this question, is cyberwar coming, is kind of a classic debate in this emerging field, and it kind of resembles that old beer commercial from the 1980s. Tastes great, less filling. It's war! Cyber war is coming, everything is digital, we've got computers everywhere, everything is vulnerable, it could be hacked, everything is about to fall apart. On the other side, no, this is just intelligence, this is electronic warfare, we've had this for 200 years, 100 years, whatever it might be, there's nothing to see there. And practitioners kind of look in this amused way and say, nothing to see here. Why don't you sit in my seat while I am defending on a daily basis intruders from Russia, from China, from wherever it might be. Every time I throw them out, they come back in. Every time I shut down one intrusion set, another one emerges. I'm in a constant ongoing battle. And if it isn't war, well, gosh, it sure feels like something close. So I want to make sure that we do justice to the feeling of practitioners that there is definitely something happening here. But at the same time, let's do justice to the fact that what's happening here looks a little bit different than what we would traditionally think of as war, where we're breaking things, people are dying or at risk of dying. So as you can see, the title of my talk here is Cyberwar Coming? No, but with a big asterisk, right? I'm on record in a lot of places arguing the case that cyber is not war. It's really important. It's a lot of other things we should think about as intelligence. We don't have a whole lot of kind of really rigorous international relations scholarship on the dynamics of intelligence. We have fantastic work on intelligence organizations, politicization of intelligence, one of the foremost scholars of intelligence here in the room. But we haven't thought about it the same way that we've thought about strategic interactions with nuclear weapons or even conventional interactions. So that's, a really interesting place that we could potentially go. But I want to, in this talk, flag a really big exception. All right, so I'll try and talk to both the no and the asterisk. But first of all, I want to kind of raise this typical image that we've seen a lot. This is the cover of The Economist back from July 2010. Coincidentally, this is the same week that there were these mysterious reports that started to emerge from Iran. It was in the Bushehr reactor at that point. Those later turned out to be mistaken reports. It was actually in the Natanz enrichment facility. And this was unbeknownst to the economists, total coincidence here. But they ran this article, and we've seen lots of other, they have this kind of digital, mushroom cloud coming up. And I think this is misleading in a lot of fundamental ways, right? Nuclear weapons are clearly terrible weapons in the hands of a very few states, whereas cyber capabilities are exactly the opposite, right? They are ambiguously irritating capabilities that are in the hands of a wide number of actors. And so kind of the fear that this kind of image brings up really does not kind of help us really get into what this particular issue might be. What I want to talk about a little bit here is, well, what happens when you take cyber capabilities, which are very different from nuclear capabilities, and you mix them together with nuclear capabilities? What kinds of dynamics, problems, and risks might start to emerge? Now, there's a long history of linking together cybersecurity and nuclear weapons. So, of course, before we had Ferris Bueller, Matthew Broderick was hacking into NORAD's Whopper, that was the computer that runs the nuclear weapons system, and almost sets off World War III. Interesting anecdote, we now know that President Reagan, of course being a big movie buff, watched this movie and came into a staff meeting the next day and said, gosh, I saw this really interesting movie. Do you think something like this could actually happen? And his chief of staff turned to him and said, well, sir, actually the problem is even worse than you think. The National Security Agency, of course, had been a very aggressive exploiter of the emerging computer revolution, but was becoming more and more aware that as the military started to adopt these same networks, vulnerabilities were opening up, and there really weren't a lot of policies there. So the very first executive order sort of emerged from these discussions, and again, that was focused really on some of the more low-level threats, but this movie may have helped to prompt some of that. Now, let's fast forward to another Hollywood vision of cyber war. This, of course, is from Battlestar Galactica, and if you haven't watched the Battlestar Galactica miniseries, let me give you a quick summary. The really bad robots show up one day, and they cyber attack the human race. And the human race has built these really cool spaceships. Unfortunately, they all run computers. They go dead in space, and that allows the bad robots to nuke all of these spaceships, except for one spaceship which is running on spit and duct tape. It hasn't upgraded its computers, therefore it's able to limp away with the Secretary of Education as the new president. Now, there are actually a couple of interesting takeaways from Battlestar Galactica. Number one, cyber is not very scary on its own. You need to combine it with really bad robots or nuclear weapons in order to kind of make it dramatic and scary. Number two, it is the combination of this disabling attack connected with kinetic weapons that actually do the destruction, which create this really interesting opportunity. There's also perhaps maybe a story about having really antiquated systems that are not exposed to the most modern hacking techniques, which we might be able to learn from Battlestar Galactica. Now, most everyday hacking activity that we see, while definitely a cause for concern, while definitely something that keeps network operators and chief security officers up at night and very, very busy, is of a wholly different nature, right? This is much more of an intelligence game, right? So this, of course, is a picture that the FBI put out in 2014 when these 5 members of the Chinese People's Liberation Army were indicted for economic espionage. So here is the face of cyber threats. Yes, ugly gorilla and candy goo. These are the guys that we need to worry about. Interestingly, this indictment focused on just the economic dimension, even though the same organization was very much involved in national security operations. The U.S. didn't want to make a big deal about that, right, because national security computer network operations are something that benefit the U.S. a great deal. But hacking for commercial espionage, that's something that the U.S. felt it really had grounds to go after the Chinese for. So we can talk a little bit more about what kinds of things we actually see, how we might think about it, how we might think about cybersecurity as an intelligence problem. But I want to kind of get back to this theme of cyber and nuclear interactions, because many of the exemplary historical cases of large-scale cyber attack actually have a nuclear element that sort of runs through them. So that's pretty interesting just for both learning about how cyber works and for learning about this interaction. So this is a satellite image of a facility in Syria known as Al-Kabar. It's on the Euphrates River, about halfway between the Iraqi and the Turkish border. There are two interesting cyber dimensions to this. One, the Israeli Mossad was able to get initial intelligence on the inside of this organization through the computers of a Syrian nuclear weapons program official, and they were able to see, well, this looks exactly like the inside of the Yongbyon reactor in North Korea. It looks like the Syrians are building a plutonium reprocessing facility here. And so it put into motion a series of discussions within Israel that culminated in a strike in 2007 against this facility. Now, this was a very, very small force package. The Israelis opted to go in with only four F-15s and 4 F-16s, and this is, ingressing through Syrian airspace, which is guarded by some fairly sophisticated Russian surface-to-air missiles. None of those were launched, right? The Israelis didn't lose any planes. They went in, dropped their bombs, destroyed this facility, and got out. We still don't know a whole lot about this episode, but it looks like that the Israelis were able to get some kind of a cyber penetration into the Syrian integrated air defense system and either spoof those systems or blind them or somehow create this window of opportunity, sort of Cylon style, right, that allowed the Israelis to get in, bomb, and get out without actually engaging the Syrian Air Force or any of their missiles. Okay, so that worked in one facility. We know that the Israelis are obviously very touchy about nuclear programs in their neighborhood. Back in 1981, they bombed the Osirak reactor near Baghdad. You can see the location of the Al-Kabar up there in the Euphrates in Syria. But at the same time, we now, the Iranians were starting to put their nuclear program back into motion. Now, just geographically, you can see that this poses a fairly serious operational problem for the Israelis, right? Al-Kabar, you can get in pretty easily, right? Jets can just kind of fly over the Mediterranean, go north a little bit, in, out, bang, bang, it's over. Getting into Osirak, that was a little bit more challenging, involved having to fly over Saudi airspace. The Natanz facility is deep in Iran, right? So it's going to be a very, very long flight going over some, either hostile or very sensitive airspace. And at the same time, keep in mind, right, they're talking the mid-aught years, so the United States has its highest level of troops in Iraq in 2007, 2008. This is the height of the surge. The United States is about to, go up to its highest levels in Afghanistan, 2009 and 2010. So the United States is very uninterested in having yet a third war in the Middle East. Okay, and a kinetic strike in Iran may be just the thing that starts that. Plus, if you look at this particular target, this is a satellite image from 2004. This is a very large facility. It's not an above-ground reactor like we looked at with the Syrian facility. This is an underground complex with a whole lot of centrifuges that will actually do the uranium enrichment. It would be a very difficult weaponeering problem, which means you'd have a much larger force package that would have to go in there, a lot more risk. This ends up being a very, very difficult military problem. So given the diplomatic, strategic, and operational risk, what other options might there be? So we now know that the United States and the Israelis put together a joint program known as Operation Olympic Games, and it produced a virus, which is more popularly known as Stuxnet, that went after the supervisory control and data acquisition, or SCADA systems, which actually control the centrifuges that spin around and do the enrichment of uranium. So this was a very, very complicated piece of software. It had techniques to cross what we call an air gap, right? Natanz was not connected to the internet, which means a human being had to carry it, either witting as a spy or unwitting as a contractor, maybe on a USB key, maybe on a laptop that was used to update the software on the SCADA system there. That would allow it to go in, to start looking around. When it found something that had the right configuration, then it could start start messing around with the centrifuges, making them spin too slow, making them spin really fast. Not so fast that they would just blow up really quickly, but fast enough that they would start to operate at a very, very inefficient rate, that they would start to break down at a slightly higher rate than they would normally. How do we know that it was designed for this target? Well, there's very little question that this could have been designed for any other target. What we're looking at here is a picture from the Public Affairs Office coming out of Tehran. Here's President Ahmadinejad. He is, hanging out with his scientists, looking at the SCADA system, and you can see they have left this picture of their centrifuge array down at the bottom. And up at the top is a diagram of an array that is within the code, and it matches it perfectly, right? So we have the exact configuration of that centrifuge cascade that is at Natanz in the particular, in Stuxnet code, right? So Stuxnet would go, it would make sure everything looked perfect. It was carefully engineered. There had to be a lot of rehearsal to put all this into operation. Once it was actually doing its dirty work, it had the ability to run some fake diagnostic information and send it back to the operators here, so that while these centrifuge cylinders were breaking, they wouldn't get any alarms, right? It was like a bank heist movie where you play the loop tape to distract the security guards while the criminals are doing their snake dance into, get the booty. So that's sort of what Stuxnet did. And I mentioned that technical detail just to sort of make the point that this is not just an amateur hacking operation, right? This is a sophisticated piece of engineering. It takes a great deal of preparation. It takes a great deal of intelligence to make sure that you understand the target that you're looking at. We now know that there were mock-ups that were put together both in the United States and in Israel so that you could test drive this code against something that would look very similar to what we had in Iran. And this went on for several years of intelligence collection before the attacker slowly started to dial it up into a kinetic attack that was breaking things. Now, for all of that effort, what did it actually do to uranium enrichment? Well, conveniently, we had the IAEA that was inspecting the Natanz facility while Stuxnet was active. The green at the bottom shows the number of actively enriching centrifuges that are operating, and the red and the blue show the input and the output, and you can see that it's actually rising during the time of the attack. How the heck is that possible? Well, it turns out that Stuxnet only took out spare cascades that were not actively filled with uranium hexafluoride gas. So by some measures, the efficiency of enrichment at Natanz actually improved throughout the course of this particular attack. So not only was this a very sophisticated attack, the attacker was pulling its punches and did not have a large material effect on actual enrichment at Natanz. We know, of course, that diplomacy rather than covert action is ultimately what helped to halt the Iranian nuclear program. I think that this was a lot more about restraining and reassuring the Israelis than it was about breaking this particular enrichment program. Stuxnet is kind of the gift that keeps on giving. I can't help but show this. This came out just 2 weeks ago. As you know, there's this nefarious group named Shadow Brokers, which is almost certainly a group affiliated with Russian intelligence. They have acquired a lot of code that looks almost certainly like it came from the NSA by some path. They have dumped it out, and people are now starting to pull it apart. This one is an exploit that is called Eternal Champion. The NSA has some great words like egotistical giraffe and eternal champion. We have the best exploits, the best names. And this one is kind of interesting because, as I mentioned, this was Operation Olympic Games, and this exploit, which dates from around kind of the provenance of Stuxnet, actually has this sort of little hacker joke inside. Now, is this spurious? Could be, who knows? We're still trying to figure out, what the connection is. But more and more evidence comes out that there are, fairly strong linkages to the U.S. government. So, Iran is not the only proliferator out there. Many of you probably watched the parade that the North Koreans put on the other day. Quite scary. A lot of new hardware, a lot of new missile systems coming on board. We know that the North Koreans, of course, have a dozen, maybe more, nuclear weapons. They're actively working to figure out how to put those on top of a missile, which will be stable enough to fire. Stuxnet-style counterproliferation efforts, the cow has kind of left the barn at this point. What might be available? Well, the New York Times has reported that the United States has been very aggressively trying to find some way to go after the North Koreans. Now, in some ways, this is a much more difficult target than even the Iranians, because the North Koreans are actually operating at a lower level of connectivity, a lower level of technology, so their exposure, again, Battlestar Galactica style, might be a little less than the Iranians or the Syrians. Nevertheless, the New York Times reports that various forms of cyber attack and electronic warfare were used to interdict the command and control systems of the delivery platforms themselves. This is called left of launch, which is distinguished from intercepting the missiles themselves, i.e. right of launch with ballistic missile defense. So if you could cause the weapon to not go off in the first place or to explode mid-flight, that would be preferable to intercepting in air. And then, maybe there's a decoy, maybe something goes wrong, maybe there's bad weather. When you're talking about intercepting a nuclear weapon, right, any way that you can go after it seems like an attractive solution when all you're looking at are bad options. Now, what do we know? Rocket science is not called rocket science for nothing, right? This is very difficult engineering. It's quite possible that these are blowing up on their own, right? The North Koreans have a heck of an engineering challenge. It's a very isolated country trying to do this. Even when the United States was testing ICBMs back in the early days, a lot of them blew up on the pad. A lot of them blew up in air. So we can't really pin this for sure on cyber, but we do know from a lot of open source reporting that the United States is very interested in these kind of left of launch programs. Now, what I find very interesting about left of launch compared to Stuxnet is that it is not only useful for prevention, which when you think about the Israeli attack on the Al-Kabar reactor, when you think of the American-Israeli attack on Natanz, these are both preventative, right? You're trying to stop the nuclear program from coming into being. Left of launch is also trying to stop the engineering, test, and evaluation process so that the North Koreans aren't confident that they actually have a deployable capability. But you could use that same capability to actually preempt. And the difference between prevention and prevention is all about starting a war because I want to fight now while the balance of power is favorable to me, rather than wait until later when the balance of power is favorable to the other guy. Whereas preemption is, I know that a blow is imminent, so I'm going to parry this right now. Okay? So the left of launch capability, while currently allegedly used in a preventative mode, could also be used in a preemptive mode. I've also divided these between overt and covert, right? The Al-Kabar strike is kind of overt, right? Airplanes are used, there's a big smoking hole at the end of the day. It was also kind of covert, right? The Israelis never really fessed up to it. This was done in the dead of night. It was as covert as you could possibly get with, 8 jets going in and bombing something. This top quadrangle of overt preemption with cyber. I haven't been able to find any really good examples that I'm satisfied with. We know it's the Cylons. Look, the Cylons told us so. It's clearly a Cylon virus. The thing about cyber operations is they tend to be very difficult to attribute, to understand, to know with very, very clear detail in the moment what's happening, and the attacker wants it that way, right? Because if you reveal how you're going to attack and when you're going to attack and what vulnerabilities you're going to use, I'm going to use egotistical giraffe against your missile launch system at 5:59 if you decide to launch. Well, the Koreans will say, well, I'm going to close egotistical giraffe with a nice patch from Microsoft. Okay? And that's the thing. You worked for years and years and years to develop those exploits. Somebody finds out about them, and suddenly they go away. So if you want to use them, you have to keep them secret. And this is where it gets really interesting with nuclear weapons. Because as Dr. Strangelove tells us, deterrence works really, really well as long as you tell the other guy. Why the heck didn't you tell us? Hey, well, the premier likes surprises or whatever reason, right? If you don't tell somebody about the deterrent, they don't know that it's there. So when they cross a red line and you get nuked, that's bad for everybody because you probably get nuked in return. So here's this interesting situation, right? Deterrence for the North Koreans, once they have a fully fielded and operational battle system. Their deterrent works because you can take nuclear weapons and you can parade them downtown Pyongyang, you can parade them in Red Square. Showing the other guy your capability is a big part of what makes nuclear weapons work. But engaging those weapons with cyber requires that you don't show the other side that you have these vulnerabilities. So now you have this very interesting situation where, say, I'm the one that is attacking your nuclear deterrent. You believe that you have a good nuclear deterrent, and I would not risk, getting nuked, right? As much as I care about, a crisis on the Korean Peninsula, I am not willing to trade Seoul for San Diego. Okay, so the other side is very, very fixed. They're certain that you're not going to attack them because at the end of the day, they're more resolved. They care about this crisis. They know that I'm not going to be willing to risk San Diego. But I know that I have infiltrated their systems. I know that if they launch, it's not going to work, or it has a very low probability of working. So I'm much more confident than I would be otherwise. But I can't tell the other side that I've infiltrated their systems because then they would fix it. So we have the situation where both sides, like teenagers, are driving towards each other, playing chicken, and both of them are absolutely confident that the other side is going to swerve. And in that situation, what happens? The cars run into one another. So this is the situation where a cyber capability left of launch, which is fantastic for war fighting, ends up being counterproductive for deterrence. So that is the quadrant that really, really concerns me. So I will just sort of wrap this up by trying to lighten things up a little bit, since I don't want to end totally on such a downer. Conclude with the patron saint of nerds, Randall Munroe, and this XKCD comic, which shows that even when you take cyber and you put it in the most rarefied military conditions, the same annoying breakdowns and malfunctions that always happen with complex systems happen in these areas as well. This friction could be something that frightens us because it creates vulnerabilities, but maybe it's also something that can slow down some of these interactions and can make us less willing to bank everything on a system that is likely to break down. All right.
There we go. We have a cyber attack. There we go. Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here. I am a native Texan as well. I was born and raised in San Antonio, so it's nice to leave the kind of coldish New England spring and come down to a nice sunny Texas. I want to start by saying first off that these views are mine alone, and if I say anything ridiculous and awful, they are not for those of the Naval War College or the U.S. Navy. So I took a little bit different of a bent than John. And so first off, the question, is cyber war coming? Well, these are all screenshots within a few minutes of each other of cyber breaches and cyber attacks and cyber exploitations that were all occurring all over the world. Those are thousands of attacks that are occurring every single second of the day. So is cyber war coming? Yes, it's here. There is a constant, persistent confrontation within the virtual realm. There is a constant competition for information within the cyberspace realm. All right, so I'm done. We all go finish our drinks. In reality, that's only so interesting. The really interesting question is whether cyber will lead to conventional conflict. And here the question is a lot more difficult. Academics in general, as John pointed out, are generally pretty critical of this, say, no, no, no. Cyberspace, the complexity and the interdependence, that causes caution. And there's a lot of vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities are going to actually keep states from launching offensive cyber operations. So therefore, cyberspace really isn't going to cause conventional conflict. Now, U.S. policymakers don't agree at all. If you listen to the testimony coming from Admiral Rogers and previously from General Alexander and our former Joint Chiefs of Staff, the general consensus is, yes, cyber is dangerous. It is going to cause us to end up in conflicts that we don't want to be into, and there's a destabilizing incentive for first strikes. And the reality is that both policymakers and academics generally don't have any solid evidence to disprove each other. So now comes the really hard question, okay, what do we know, what can we know that can help us understand this big debate? So the answer, John said no with an asterisk, and I, like a good academic, said yes, but, which is the same thing as an asterisk. We can't possibly, say something definitively. So I'm going to start this with part one. So yes, I do think that cyber war is coming, but maybe not in the way you think. So the first thing we want to look at is our offensive cyber operations, the use of cyber network attacks. Will those lead to crisis escalation and inadvertent war? Actually the case studies suggest no. So if you think to Stuxnet, if you think to the Saudi Aramco attacks, if you look at the very large Iranian campaign from 2011 to 2013 against US dams and financial infrastructure, if you look at the North Korean current attacks on the international banking, there's very little response. The Iranians didn't launch an attack against the United States or Israel after they found out about Stuxnet. In fact, the highest level response that we've seen so far are economic sanctions under the Obama administration. So maybe some cyber tit for tat, but in general, we would say the limited case studies suggest that there's not very much evidence for that. But that's not super satisfying because these aren't extraordinary cyber attacks. So what we're starting to do is look at evidence from wargaming. Now, wargaming is kind of an interesting method to understand cyberspace operations because it takes behavioral attributes and looks at how individuals respond in various types of incidents. So this allows us to kind of do a little bit of experimental type work to see whether cyber operations do in fact influence crisis behaviors. So what I did is I looked at 6 years of crisis wargaming that we did at the Naval War College. Now this is a big war game, it's not a cyber war game, and so the players were given a lot of different tools that ranged from cyber operations to economic sanctions, the use of diplomacy, all the way up to the use of nuclear weapons. And I went back and looked at 6 years of data. They had different crisis scenarios against different types of actors. And what we found was that blue, which is the team that's playing the United States, these are generally kind of high-level decision makers within the US government, were more comfortable conducting conventional attacks with conventional weapons and killing people, and even putting forces on nuclear alert, than they were to do offensive cyber operations. So in 5 out of the 6 years, the players dropped bombs before they used a cyber attack. That's really interesting. So there was extreme reluctance to use cyber operations. This was primarily, and we look back at what the game players said to each other, it was primarily a fear of escalation. They said, you guys, we can't use cyber attacks. If we use cyber attacks, they're necessarily going to go nuclear. So there's this idea that cyber leads to some sort of nuclear, or at least escalatory response. What's interesting, however, was that in all 6 of these years, the blue players never once responded to an adversary cyber attack. And that includes years where there were cyber attacks on allied nuclear infrastructure that caused nuclear effects. This is a strange dissonance, where on one hand we think it is too dangerous to use, and at the same time don't think it's important enough to respond to. These types of actions indicate that perhaps cyber operations are in fact not as escalatory as policymakers were previously worried about. So the real question, what this indicates is that there may be something that is fundamentally different about the way we view cyberspace operations than the way we view conventional means of fighting wars. And one potential explanation goes into neuroscience and cognitive explanations. When we experience emotions, we experience them these emotions are experienced in different parts of our brain and have different biological reactions. When we experience fear, we have a gut reaction, and it causes us to have some sort of response. Now, fear is generally something that is primed within the human body, and therefore we're evolutionarily conditioned to respond to certain threats with a snake, for example. Even if we know consciously that we're not afraid of snakes, a psychologist can actually measure the subconscious reaction that we have to snakes. Cyber is a virtual threat, and it's not something we've been evolutionarily conditioned to fear. And therefore, instead of experiencing fear, there's a good chance that what we're experiencing is anxiety. If we're anxious, that leads to inaction, as opposed to fear that leads to action. And this can potentially explain some of the behavior that we're seeing here from decision makers, where we're anxious about it, so we don't want to use it. We're also anxious when it happens, and so we choose not to respond. And I think we see similar sort of analogies in our own behaviors day to day. So I bet within this room there are a lot of people who have had their identity stolen, who have had their credit card information stolen, who have been told that their username has been compromised for their banking institution. But did anybody go out and buy gold and put it under their bed? No. But if you had been told that your home was broken into or that your bank was broken into, you might have a very different response. So that could explain some of the potential responses to cyber. And because of this type of actions that we're seeing in wargaming, my answer to is Cyberwar Coming is I don't think war is going to result from offensive cyber actions. That said, that was kind of the easy question. The second question is really that there might be something more dangerous about the link between cyberspace and conventional operations. And this is where I think that the linkage between cyberspace and conventional operations might actually lead to war and increase the chance of inadvertent escalation. So we see that over the last 20 years, there's been an explosion of digital technologies and capabilities on the U.S. battlefield, and for most modern militaries. But because of that, that's created a reliance on cyber-dependent operations and technologies, and that's made us both extraordinarily capable and increasingly vulnerable. So this all starts with understanding what happens, in 1996 when we decide as the U.S. military that we're going to invest in email and internet and digitally enabled weaponry that allows us to conduct what we call network-centric warfare. That means that we're going to focus on the passing of information between smart weapons so that we can increasingly target and coordinate and conduct extraordinarily precise and lethal operations. The problem is that this information technology has created an extraordinary reliance on a digital dominance. So when we ask the question, is cyber war coming, you're expecting a bunch of pictures that are ones and zeros, but in reality, the largest impact of the evolution of cyberspace technologies is in conventional warfare. So on the top left, this is an air operations command. Without those computer systems, without the software that runs on them, without the hardware, U.S. isn't able to launch airstrikes. They're not able to look and dynamically retask the weapon systems that they have. These become vital components to winning modern wars. Down on this side right here, that's the inside of an unmanned, like a Predator control cell. These unmanned systems that we've invested so heavily in, they're completely reliant on digital technology. Without digital dominance, you can't fly them. And in fact, the Iranians, who are kind of subpar cyber actors, intercepted one of our drones using some sort of cyber attack. On the bottom is the F-35, which the Air Force has referred to as the flying cloud. So the advantage of this particular weapon is the ability to share information between air platforms. And we have remote vehicles that we use in order to detonate IEDs. These are all controlled with digital components. And then we have the JTAC on the battlefield. These are the Joint Terminal Attack Controllers that call in airstrikes, which use kind of an iPad to call in airstrikes. I mean, even the guy on the Afghanistan battlefield is absolutely dependent on these digital technologies. You know, to really, I want you guys to understand like how big a difference this is. On the left, this is a Russian SA-3. This is analog, right? It can target only a few things. It has, you know, medium range, but it doesn't have a lot of capability against maneuvering or multiple targets. But on the bottom, just with changing out the components from analog to digital, it's able to target multiple different weapon systems that are coming at it. It's able to respond to jamming. There's just an extraordinary increase in digital capabilities. But the top left, that's not vulnerable to a cyber attack. The bottom right is vulnerable to a cyber attack. It's vulnerable to its hardware going down. It's vulnerable to a series of different dependencies that the one on the top left isn't. So it's a real trade-off. So I argue that what this creates is a capability vulnerability paradox. Whereas states become more and more dependent on digital technologies, they become extraordinarily capable. And yet they also become extraordinarily vulnerable. When a state is extraordinarily capable and yet vulnerable to a first strike, you get this odd incentive where states which would normally be the powerhouse are forced to take preemptive strikes. And where adversaries know that if they don't take a first strike against these vulnerabilities, they have no chance of winning conflict. So this becomes a very precarious situation. And the real threat here is not just cyber attacks. I already talked to you about offensive cyber operations. The real threat is that these digital capabilities are vulnerable to a series of cross-domain threats, from undersea cable cutting, which we're seeing the Russians are exercising, anti-satellite attacks, which we're seeing the Chinese are preparing for, electromagnetic jamming, cyber attacks, and then as well as conventional strikes, taking a normal kind of dumb bomb and dropping it on a power node or a communications node, and then special operations attacks. So the real danger is how extraordinarily vulnerable these capabilities are across domains. So, is cyber war coming? I would argue kind of cyber war, you can call it something else. Cyber confrontation in cyberspace is already here. So the more interesting question is whether cyber operations lead to cyber war. And I think generally not. Cyber operations will probably not lead to cyber war, but it is the connection between our dependencies on digital capabilities and the cross-domain threats to those vulnerabilities that is the real danger here. And for that reason, I think that the digital capabilities and the cyberspace capabilities that we've created over the last 20 years have actually put us in a situation where we do have the potential for war based on cyberspace incentives.
Well, we do have a microphone looming around, but the acoustics in this room are really good. So if it's okay, we're just going to use our big boy and big girl voice. And hopefully it's the same. If anybody has trouble hearing, please just raise your hand and we can repeat things. But we'll avoid technology for the next half an hour. So there's a million things to talk about in this presentation, so I'm sure you have a million questions, but I'm going to take the prerogative and kick this off with one question for each of you. One thing from Jon, your talk, you talked about covert action versus diplomacy. And you used the example of the Iran scenario. You said, allegedly, the United States did the Stuxnet attack on Iran in an attempt to get rid of its nuclear program or badly slow down its nuclear enrichment activities through sabotage, using cyber for sabotage. That didn't work. Actually, the amount kept going up and up and up. And as you put it at the end, diplomacy, not covert action, halted Iran's nuclear activities. I'm wondering if this is an either-or proposition. Okay? That if you're, from the U.S. perspective, the goal of U.S. grand strategy, broadly defined, is maintain the status quo. Right? Despite what you hear on the news, things are pretty good. The United States has a large economy, a large military, it's relatively secure. We'd like to keep it that way. And when we think about cyber technologies, very often people talk about these as being weapons of the weak, right? So we worry about countries like Iran or others using cyber against us. But I'm wondering, if I was a diplomat, maybe a sharp-edged diplomat, and I said something to my counterparts like, I'm not admitting we did Stuxnet, we're pretty good at this stuff, would that be a way of disabusing weaker powers of the notion that they can overcome their weaknesses by using cyber tools? Right? Would that be a way of enhancing U.S. diplomacy by suggesting our own offensive cyber capabilities?
It's certainly possible, and I think that we need to investigate that once the documents and interviews become available. But the opposite is also a possibility, right? That side may say, okay, well, you're willing to do some covert stuff with me. I know that you have the capability for an airstrike, but you're not going to do that. You're throwing some sand in the gears. So you're telling me that you care about it, but you don't care enough to send the very best. But maybe what you're really telling me is that you're afraid of this nuclear deterrent that I'm going to build. And you've told me that my regime is illegitimate. You've shown me what regime change looks like. I don't want that. And if a nuclear weapon will enable me to avoid that, maybe that's exactly what I want. So you're telling me you're going to keep doing this. Now you've just doubled my resolve to work even harder to make sure that I bring that into being.
And for you, Jackie, it's a fascinating project. This notion of using wargaming to sort of illustrate that you find a way of exploring what a crisis would actually look like, how it would play out. But there's something odd about it. Right? On the one hand, you started with the table showing the responses and the options to use cyber. And everybody said, no, we're not doing cyber. We don't want to ask them. We don't want to do cyber. And even after being attacked with cyber, it's like, we're not going to respond to the company. Okay? There's incredible caution and reticence to use this tool. And yet you ended the talk talking about how seemingly obvious this is. If I was facing an adversary who was deeply connected, who had this capability, vulnerability paradox, of course I would attack them through cyber. Of course I would try to either use offensive cyber operations or cut cables or whatever. It's totally compelling to do this, to sort of cut them off by attacking their communications and their technology. So what's going on? Why are people not behaving as they should be? Why aren't they grasping this opportunity more fully?
Yeah, I mean, so first off, I think that policymakers are probably more comfortable with cutting undersea cables and dropping bombs on something than they are on doing a cyber attack. And I'll talk about Yemen here. So under the Obama administration, there was a pretty significant unmanned campaign in Yemen. We were dropping bombs, and there were a few manned attacks in Yemen as well. But the first campaign that was authorized to do cyber attacks was against ISIS, not Yemen. In fact, I mean, who knows, but I've never heard of that ever being authorized. So under the Obama administration, they were more comfortable dropping bombs than they were conducting cyber attacks. So I think there's actually something very specific about the cyber domain that's causing this particular feeling. I mean, it's something probably about the virtuality of the domain. It's something about the fact that you can't completely say with certainty what the effects will be and what the collateral damage will be, what the risk of escalation will be. And for the United States, you almost don't have to, because you have so much conventional capability that if there is uncertainty in the cyberspace realm, you have the luxury of backing off and not using it and not responding to it because you have this extraordinary conventional dominance. This experiment or this war game was conducted with Americans. I would love to do something similar with different cultures and try and understand whether these incentives are something that are unique to Americans, that are unique to the American way of thinking and the American way of war, or whether that's something that's even more generalizable.
Perhaps you can bring in some of the international students at the Naval War College.
Yeah.
Terrific. So let's throw it up in the question and answer. Sir, please.
I'd just like to follow up on the discussion that Jacqueline really started to dive in a little bit more succinctly. I just had a similar conversation with some people well versed in the area, I guess. I just had my 40th West Point reunion, okay? And at the reunion, a couple of my former roommates and I were sitting around. Of course, alcohol is involved, yeah, as you know. But one was a former chief of staff of the Army, just retired. The other one was just spent 30 years in the CIA. And as you know, CIA thinkers are very dramatically different than people who spent 30 years moving up to become chief of staff of the Army, okay? And the hypothesis that Rolf came up with, the CIA guy, was that the reason that we don't grasp cyber warfare, it was a couple of reasons. One was the mental model of the Army, as it were, and of course Ray is getting a little skittish about this because they're very conventional. You go to Command General Staff College, you go to Army War College, you're taught to think conventionally, you're taught this. It was never really introduced. Perhaps it is now with people like you in the Naval War College. But he also introduced the fact that, if you look at Congress, how many of those people have science degrees or engineering degrees or any kind of background in anything like that? And the answer is like nobody, hardly, right? And so Congress doesn't understand it. The political environment doesn't understand it. Most of our warriors who are in charge at the highest levels don't necessarily understand it. Gee, what do you think? Are we having a problem grasping this? And is those people kind of go away? Please.
I mean, I think that's the general perception. Every time we go to one of these events where there are practitioners who are really in the cyber technical realm, they complain, if only the policymakers would understand this, we'd get better policies and we'd generally be able to use these more often. I think there's some validity in that, but the Army is actually moving somewhat in a different direction. So the Army recently stood up what they call the cyber support to the corps and below. And they're thinking about what does cyber operations look like to infantry unit? And what does cyber operations look like to the armored unit? And then trying to integrate that within exercises and even doctrine. So TRADOC, the organization that does the doctrinal revisions, and if anybody is Army, Army lives and dies by its doctrine. Maybe they could do whatever with that, but Army, this is a huge signal for organizational trajectories. So I think the Army is actually really starting to look into this and think about what cyber means to kind of the basic unit of maneuver within the Army. So I think we are seeing some progress there, but I think part of the problem has been that the organization that has been really pushing the narrative of cyber operations is Cyber Command. And Cyber Command has been suffering under this problem of wanting to do everything. And so Cyber Command, which currently falls under Strategic Command, goes to policymakers and says, guys, we're strategic, we're special, we do deterrence, we got this. We're really good at this stuff. And the policymakers said, yep, strategic, special, Strategic Command, okay, you're like nukes. Let's centralize control, let's hold it at the highest levels, and let's not touch this thing, kind of like we don't want to use nukes. And then Cyber Command goes to the operational commander and says, hey, I know we said that we were strategic and special, but we also can help you on the operational level. And the operational level guy says, awesome, what do you got? And Cyber Command says, well, I can't tell you, and you're not going to be authorized to use it. So I think this is actually one of the organizational problems, is that they try to do everything, and in that space have actually kind of maneuvered themselves out of anybody's interest in using cyberspace operations.
I can see it happening.
Sure. I want to pick up on your question, sir. I thought it was really interesting where you distinguished the military and the intelligence way of thinking about this. And I talked a lot about the asterisk but not the no part. And I want to pick up on this. If you kind of think about, if you were going to run a traditional intelligence operation, so think of Bridget Spies or the Americans or a Jon R novel, you need to get somebody in place that's not going to be detected. They need to have bona fides that give them a reason for being there. You need to have dead drops that allow you to leave information to communicate. You need to have cutouts, which are individuals that don't understand the operation but know how to get to other cutouts to the agent. You need to have safe houses where the case officer who's going to wear a disguise will be able to meet with the agent in place. all of that infrastructure has interesting digital analogs, right? So that KGB retread, which we call APT29, put together a really interesting operation where the infected computer would have an algorithm where it would check a Twitter account, and there was a new Twitter account that was generated every single day. If the controller wanted to pass information, they would put a web address and an encryption key. The malware would then go to another cloud-based server. It would pull up a picture. Inside that picture was encrypted some additional information, which it would then use to unlock to get further instructions and go on and do the next thing, or pass information that it's stolen to another server. This is the same tradecraft, but it's happening in cyberspace. The operations take a long time to set up. They are vulnerable in exactly the same ways. The only difference is that the operator is not vulnerable because you don't have human beings involved. But the operational aspects are completely vulnerable. They take a lot of tradecraft, they take a lot of planning. So that's an intelligence approach to doing these things. And if you're going to pivot from collecting information to breaking things, you still need to do the same kinds of things to get those agents in place so they're going to be able to operate and do things. So I think kind of the challenge that we're facing is how do you take these classic intelligence collection and covert action ways of operating, which have traditionally been really small-scale CIA, black chamber kinds of operations, and scale them up to the level that a military in a large operation can, do it and run it. And it's just a very different way of thinking about things.
I would like to kind of piggyback on the last question. The average person in America, and I'll get in this room tonight, the average person, you say the word cyber, they're scared to death. They don't know anything. That's why they're scared. And my question is, and what I really don't understand, is why the industry of you all don't introduce or whatever is something called Cyber 101 to tell the public really what's going on and how it works. And I'm sure that the opposition, the adversaries, whoever they are, know there's no secrets to them. I mean, we're not divulging anything. So my question is, what accounts for this unreasonable secrecy on a part of the industry?
I feel like you're looking at all our dirty laundry here. I think going back to what Jon just said, part of the problem is these cyber capabilities came from an organization that is incentivized to be secret, and the National Security Agency. And the National Security Agency because of that strong incentive for secrecy and not telling people what you're doing, I think that's created a legacy that's extended into the military. And to completely understand, the military that the U.S. has been built literally on the technological backbone of the National Security Agency. The initial billets that stood up Cyber Command were National Security Agency personnel. And the actual operators that were building a lot of the capabilities were National Security Agency personnel. To this day, NSA and Cyber Command have not split, and so they have one head, who is Admiral Rogers. And because of that, and they're in the same building, they literally, Cyber Command sits in the same office, took offices away from NSA. They all eat in the same cafeteria. And that is extraordinarily strong organizational incentives. The Chinese, so the Russians were the same way. They came from Intel as well. Chinese did not. The Chinese cyber capabilities came from the PLA, which is their army. We saw for the last 10 years that the Chinese capabilities were generally brute force. They didn't care about being covert. They just wanted to get a lot done really quickly. And so you saw very different tactics, and I think there's some level of effectiveness in those tactics. So I think there's a strong argument to be made that how these cyberspaces elements originate institutionally drives whether they're going to be covert and not tell anyone about them, or whether they're going to be a little more open.
There's also very big incentives both on the government and the industrial side to exaggerate the threat. Anytime you have a threat that is hard to understand, highly technical, highly secret, in a time when defense budgets are going down, there are big incentives to talk about how apocalyptic this is going to be. This is just what the Beltway does and has always done. We can find lots of other different examples. So cyber kind of has that flavor. You also have new organizations like U.S. Cyber Command that are trying to establish themselves. When the U.S. Air Force was trying to establish itself as a service, it had to tell a very big story about strategic bombing and how this technology was fundamentally changing the world. And this organization was the one that would be able to make it work. Now, over on the industrial side, it's very interesting when you read about these reports on Stuxnet or Russian hacks or Chinese hacks. They are private cybersecurity firms that are producing this really interesting technical analysis. And they give it away for free. Now, that's kind of weird. Getting this stuff away for free? Well, it's because the industry actually has a very hard time of measuring security. If you're in an industry that can't measure the main thing that it's competing on, you have to find a proxy to signal your effectiveness. So these technical reports are basically marketing material to advertise how sophisticated these companies are. Again, they also have incentives to make sure that you believe that there is a large threat that only this firm is going to be able to protect you from. So I think that's why bringing some level of balance to this, and if we were to really kind of talk about cyber in a really sober way, then it would be like talking about, economic trade policy and whether technical trade barriers are legitimate, and, that would get really boring really fast, and yet that's what working cyber policy would probably look like.
In the very back.
To piggyback off what you just said, this last January I had an opportunity to go visit Pacific Command and visit with General O'Shaughnessy, who's
Ha! That was my old wing commander.
Former Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
Former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Maurice Schwartz, was in the room as well. And the concern, not so much on the military having the cyber technology to do it, to have defense capabilities against cyber warfare, but there's a growing concern that in the military they're not necessarily getting the best personnel to operate this technology, because a lot of young students coming out of college who are top of their class are going to take jobs in Silicon Valley, at Google, or Facebook, or so forth. And there's a growing concern of that, and I'd just like to get what your thoughts are on that.
Well, if you'd like to work for Cyber Command, please let's talk afterwards. I think this is actually a really huge concern that the U.S. government, U.S. military has had. It's really hard to get technological talent to work, especially when you're telling them you need to take a physical fitness test and you can't have blue hair, and all these things that are kind of part of the alternative tech culture are not condoned in the military. So there are discussions being had right now about one kind of what do we do in the military that we need to do to be the military in terms of these cultural norms. And the other thing that's happening is looking at more creative ways of having people come in and out of the military. So maybe they can have primarily work at Silicon Valley, but take a fellowship to work within the DoD. Or maybe we can allow a better in and out between reservists who are able to do their civilian job and actually be trained by their civilian company, and then come and take that knowledge and the capability and take those into the DoD. And so I know we're thinking about it, and a lot of it requires new laws about how we bring people in and out of the active duty.
If I think back 30, 40 years, and maybe more recently, there was a great debate on nuclear strategy between counterforce and counter-value targets. Counter-value targets are blowing up Moscow and Chicago. Counterforce is knocking out the ICBMs that are not in North Dakota. Most of what y'all have talked about is really counterforce.
Yep.
Now, it strikes me, just knowing nothing about this, but knowing that our economy is probably electronically more advanced than most other countries, or almost every other country, certainly as every adversary, that we're probably a lot more vulnerable economically to this stuff than the Russian economy or the Chinese economy or the Iranian economy or the North Korean economy for sure. And therefore, I wonder if the greater threat to us from this whole thing is knocking out electric power in the United States, knocking out our gas pipelines, knocking out our airline and train system, and to say nothing at all about our financial systems. And so if our economy could be so affected by this, it strikes me that rather than spending money on counter-force capability, I'd rather force the electric power companies and the transportation companies and the banks to harden up.
Oh, well, that is a very interesting point, because I think a lot of people have said that, but I think there are probably people within this room who work for those various critical infrastructures who would tell the government, get out of my pie, I don't want any more regulation. And I think that there's an extraordinary tension over wanting the US government to provide better policies and better capabilities to defend against civilian critical infrastructure, and then the civilian critical infrastructure not wanting to bring in the US government, whether that's the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, or in very rare cases, the Department of Defense or the
Because
National Guard.
before, we could destroy Moscow.
Yeah.
Now, of course, that might not be that great for New York, but we could destroy Moscow. Kind of an even trade. Now, I don't know if it's an even trade.
I would agree with you. I think there is an asymmetry which could be motivating a lot of the behaviors for the United States. Under the Obama administration, they really were sensitive about this asymmetry and vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure, which is why that you saw that they initiated a presidential directive for the ability to utilize economic sanctions, and the attacks against civilian critical infrastructure were explicitly laid out there. They've also tried to propagate a series of norms about not attacking critical infrastructure. The problem with norms is that the norms that generally work are norms that work on some level for a lot of people. And right now we're the ones that benefit the most from the norm not to attack civilian critical infrastructure. I actually think that a partnership between the civilian sectors and the US government has to happen, or this problem is not going to be solved. And so I think you've highlighted one of the probably largest potential cybersecurity policy problems for the Trump administration.
Sure. A lot of things that could be done to address vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure, whether you're worried about cyber attacks or you're just worried about glitches in complex systems, are kind of the same sorts of things, right? So because we haven't had any large, counter-value critical infrastructure attacks, people always point to, brownouts and electrical power going down, and maybe there was a big dam in Russia where the turbine was tagged out and ended up killing 75 people, right? These are terrible accidents, but they're accidents. And so the kind of things that you would do to create reliable computer systems that could just withstand normal everyday folly were the same kind of things that you would do to harden up for a cyber attack. So all those things are worth doing, right? Similar argument, like if you're worried about bioterrorism, then be worried about pandemics, right? Because you should just do the same thing to improve the health system rather than getting so focused on the bioterrorism piece. On the specific, kind of the counter value language comes out of that, deterrence literature, which is all about using the threat of imposing pain. So you need to be able to impose that pain, and it needs to be useful in some way. And with cyber, those are two interesting propositions. What does it actually take to create a great deal of damage, not just as an accident, but as a weapon, right? Which means at your command. And then if you're able to do it, why is it going to be useful? And you have to think about what the response is going to be. And if you attack somebody like the United States enough to really hurt and kill a lot of people, and yet you don't paralyze the entire U.S. military, then you have pretty good expectation that there's going to be something coming back in the other direction. So I just think that we haven't quite worked out what the strategic case is and really understood what the operational possibility is. So I kind of fall back on, well, given that those are ambiguous enough, let's just kind of harden towards the accidents that are most likely to happen.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about active measures in particular. You hear about these robot trolls basically trying to sway political, a political outcome in a country. I mean, so what do you think? Where do you think that's going, and what kind of defenses do you think we could employ?
Yeah, that's a great question. So active measures is kind of the Russian term of art for covert action. You know, this idea that we're going to put in propaganda, we're going to create noise, we're going to try and manipulate elections, what have you. And this is something that KGB and kind of even SARS organs before then, you know, were very actively involved in. And this is kind of just a new cyber version. And I think, you know, we haven't even really started to have the conversation about, do you fight the Twitter bots with more Twitter bots that are doing your own? Do you try and sway the debate on the other side, right? Do you kind of do more of your own dirty tricks to overcome the other side's dirty tricks? Or do we need to figure out what the 21st century equivalent of Voice of America and Radio Free Europe look like, right? Do we take the high road and try and build in better mechanisms that are going to help people evaluate, you know, information? You know, are we going to fund journalism? Are we going to fund academia? It's the self-interested plug, but I mean, you know, people that are more focused on trying to, you know, tease out what the debate actually looks like. And there are pros and cons to both of these approaches, honestly. And I don't think we're quite having that conversation yet.
I would agree. I think in general, the United States believes more information is good for the big G. And like it causes democracies. And this was a big shock to that assumption. Because we have extraordinary laws about information operations, and those authorities are also very closely held. So we just think of this very differently than authoritarian cultures do. And there's no way in the world that we can mirror image and do what they did on us to them, because the way they process and understand information is extraordinarily different. So they don't have a proliferation of information, they have small amounts of information that they don't trust anyway. So I think this is going to be, I think we will have an extraordinarily unique response. We will not do exactly what the Russians did.
Well, this gets back to the earlier comment that some civic education might be in order. That if you don't have the ability to respond in kind, given the nature of the political system, maybe more political education at home, technological education might be profound. I want to come over all the way to this side. Sandy, please.
It sounds as though, for Jacqueline, the rational calculus of mutually assured destruction still holds pretty much, with some increased risk of preemptive kinds of attacks because of the vulnerabilities you identify. But doesn't that rational calculus assume that we have leaders of countries who are conventionally rational? And I think during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was some reason to think that both Khrushchev and Kennedy were kind of people that were conventionally rational in that sense. I think the leaders of the U.S. and North Korea, for instance, are anything but conventionally rational. So how do you take that into account when you do an analysis of what threats exist?
I think then you get into individual personality level analysis. So I've actually done some work into looking how individual leaders' risk propensities affect the ways in which they fight wars, and found that for presidents who are risk averse, they're more likely to use kind of unmanned. So I mean, there's some work you can do to try to understand personality traits and how that affects decisions to use different means of conflict. I think in terms of your question about mutually assured destruction, I think that we don't have that in cyberspace. I don't even think we have mutually assured vulnerability. I think that there's probably an asymmetry in vulnerability, where the United States is more vulnerable. But we're increasingly seeing that as states become more modern, like the Chinese, and they're becoming more conscious of their own vulnerabilities, and we may see more of that stability between the two countries. If you're talking about, North Korea and I mean, it's a really tough problem, but we have a lot of capabilities cocked to fight for both sides, and in some cases, in general, that seems to be the Pareto optimal situation. So we'll see.
Top row.
So we're talking about the vulnerabilities that are inherent in these very complex systems, and I'm just curious your take on this. There seems to be this inherent tension in the U.S. government in terms of what to do with vulnerability. I'm thinking specifically with zero-day exploits, where on the one hand, you want to patch them up because they leave us vulnerable, but yet at the same time, we want to leave them open for our own internal purposes. So it seems like you're talking out both sides of your mouth. So I was just curious what your take is
Yeah, so this term uses 0 day. It's this idea that all software has flaws. People make mistakes when they're coding. Hackers are trying to find these because these are the open doors that allow you to get into a system and start to make mischief. So when you first find out about it, that's day 0, right? And that then enables the vendor to start putting together a patch. And maybe that takes 5 days, maybe it takes a month, maybe it takes a couple of months, depends on how severe the vulnerability is and how reactive that organization is. So if you are a top-tier intelligence organization or gray hat organization, you want to try and amass these things because these are basically the golden tickets that you want to cash in, but you don't necessarily need them all of the time, right? Not everybody updates their systems. Sometimes they're lazy. Sometimes there are really good reasons not to update your system because if you are certified in a factory, it takes a long time to make sure that everything is interoperable. So if there's a new version that comes out that's patched, you might not put it together right away. So that means that if you're an attacker, you don't always have to use 0 days. But having them on hand is a really good thing. If you see an attack that has 5 0 days, that's usually a good sign that there was a really advanced intelligence organization that was there. But that really makes this trade-off, right? Are you going to keep the 0 day so that you want to use it under these rare circumstances to go after a hard target, or are you going to then patch that 0 day, which improves your defenses in case somebody else has found that same vulnerability and they are hiding and they're waiting to use it against you? Right? So just imagine, you open up the newspaper and we have one of these terrible, massive failures in the air traffic control system, and it turns out that the 5 0 days that country X used, the NSA had in their inventory and could have patched but didn't. Right? That would be a public relations disaster. So that's really a problem in how you kind of adjudicate that process. And I think that NSA, while the incentives have been to program, sort of been at least erring on the side of trying to be a little bit open and patching. At least that's the public.
I mean,
who knows?
You see, talking out both sides of the mouth. Yeah. Different organizations within the U.S. government are literally saying different things. I bet Admiral Rogers has his Jekyll Hyde days. So yeah, we're right.
Okay, good.
We hear the story of the possibility of cyber attack on the one hand, and we hear for conventional weapons, we hear a lot about drone strikes recently. How much should we worry about the possibility that drones are hacked and then it is used for attack against us, or it is used in the regular aggression?
You should worry about drones being hacked. It would be extraordinarily more difficult to then control it. You have to have kind of a back-end system for that. And even more difficult to employ weapons. And even more difficult to employ them against U.S. citizens. So I would say be worried that the unmanned systems that we are investing so heavily in will not be relevant in future conflict. Be worried about that. But I don't think I would worry less about them being then turned around and used on us, just because it's going to be technically so much more difficult.
I asked a question of a different type of asymmetry, going back to the counter force and counter value. There's, going to Ferris Bueller, you have the image of some guy who is hung over a computer screen who can basically disable the world. He's basically not a valued target, and yet there's an image out there that I share that there are people who are trying to do mischief that are, if not operating solo, but in a relatively small organization, not a big target. So how do you, when the target is very large and the potential damage is very great, and the perpetrator is essentially a low value person, how do you deal with that kind of asymmetry?
So one possibility is to actually employ deceptive techniques against the deceptive attackers, right? So there's this idea that offense is really easy in cyberspace because it's very easy for attackers to obfuscate their identities, and so maybe even a small group of hackers somewhere who had really, really good skills and they had really good intel, they could do things. But if they have to worry that the very systems that they're attacking may be phony systems that are set up to look very realistic, that are set up to waste their time, if they have to worry that the intelligence that they are downloading may be laced with malware that is designed to hack the hacker, now they have to slow down and stop operating in a really, really more cautious way. This is not a new cyber thing. This is kind of a classic counterintelligence approach to the world where, yes, a spy who is unchecked can do a great deal of damage. But a spy that has to worry about counterintelligence agents that are trailing him, that are spying him, that becomes really, really difficult. So I think that there's some possibility.
So just quickly, and maybe a bit of a return, to what extent when we talk about cyber attacks on U.S. infrastructure, banking, et cetera, to what extent is the interconnectedness of the U.S. economy, economically and otherwise, an actual deterrent to attacking its infrastructure, in the sense that potential enemies might suffer as badly as we would suffer?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So kind of going, on the real general level of what makes cyber attack possible. What makes cyber attack possible is the internet, and computers in general, are so darn useful. And they're useful because we connect them, and we're able then to offload things that we used to do ourselves to other companies. We're able to bank online, we're able to buy things. We're able to connect, right? We're able to trust people that we don't even know, and we have all of these intermediaries, what we're doing. So it's the utility of the internet for everybody that makes it useful. And all of that trust makes deception also possible. So all of this exploitation is then possible. But the internet is useful for everybody. So it's not just deterrence that is keeping a lid on it. It's also the desire to maintain the ongoing use of these connected networks. Talking short of war here, right? So if you're going to be deceptive and your deception involves using trusted networks, you need to not be so flagrant and abusive that people just decide to stop trusting those networks altogether. They decide to disconnect. They decide to go back to a less digital way of interacting. If you were very, very aggressive, people might start considering that. So there's kind of this moderation that's built in as long as the internet is useful for a lot of people, and as long as your exploitation depends on the trust that makes it useful in the first place.
This is where I think we disagree. I think your logic works really well for states, especially states that are highly connected. But the vast majority of at least the attacks in the financial industry are crime. And the criminal stuff, they're not worried about whether the interconnectedness and losing the capability to bank is going to affect them. They're not even, they're kind of they're using Bitcoin and black market. So I think that the interconnectedness might have a strong deterrence effect on states conducting large-scale attacks on each other's critical infrastructure, but that it doesn't do much to dissuade criminals or even hacktivists or organizations like ISIS.
It doesn't prevent them, but they still have to worry about getting caught, getting found out. They still have to worry about the investigation. They still have to worry about all of their infrastructure getting rolled back. So, you still see the ransomware attacks getting dialed down to this level where the victim is going to pay, but not get hurt so badly that they're going to activate a major investigation, which is going to start. So, again, this is the paradox is connectivity makes deception possible, but connectivity is useful, so it puts a lid on it. So there's going to be a lot of bad stuff going on, but there's still a ceiling around that.
Over here, please.
Hi. I'd like to bring it back to the topic of culture of secrecy inside. Can you guys hear me? Sorry.
A little bit louder, please.
I'd like to bring it back to culture of secrecy in cyber command and those sorts of areas. So I know it can be a very touchy subject, but to what extent are we sharing information with our allies? And do you think that our current systems of sharing information are robust enough to create a long-term sustainable defense?
This is actually a pretty easy win. And we have a really strong relationship with our Five Eye partners, which are Australia, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Canada. I know I always forget Canada. State of North, it's really cold. Non-retribution. Anyway, so we actually have extraordinarily strong relationships in the cyber realm and in the technical intelligence realm with those 5 countries. That's less developed with our kind of Asian alliance partners. I think because of the nature of those alliances, those are bilateral relationships, and so they're a little bit different. And generally, our Asian allies have not reached the same capacity and capability level that most of the Five Eye partners, minus the Kiwis, have gone to. And then for NATO, NATO's a really tricky one because, understatement, right? Because I think there's kind of the institutional mechanisms to be sharing a lot more information in cyberspace, but there is strong policy divergence between the countries in NATO about what you want to do with that information. And because of that, I think that it has limited a lot of the sharing within NATO.
Well, and there's the inverse problem too, right? I mean, so when Mr. Snowden decided to walk out of the NSA with all of the secrets, it didn't just embarrass the United States, it embarrassed Canada, it embarrassed Great Britain, right? Because it exposed other intelligence operations. And so here you are, a junior Five Eyes partner, you don't have the same kind of resourcing budget. Like, these are kind of precious things you invested in, and suddenly it gets totally blown out by this other guy, in the United States. So that's, I think, the other side of sharing.
Yeah, back to.
Oh no, sorry.
I can't help but harken back to your last slide that talked about how the entire military was dependent upon our real exposure is that if somehow they were to hack into our military, we'd be kind of a bit crippled. The whole idea of deterrence back in the time that it was nuclear was, can you survive a first strike and do credible damage from the other side? So when you look at this whole issue of cyber and the dependence that our entire defense establishment has, based on cyber, and there were to be a massive cyber attack on our systems, are we at a stage where there is survivability to the degree that we would have a response? Because the way you described it, at least came across to these old ears, that kind of really was a very, very huge exposure that we have. And I kind of like to just know whether or not there is opportunity for survivability and a response back or not.
Well, the good news is we're thinking about it. And I want to also caveat that I think the greatest threat is if there was a cyber attack in conjunction with a series of conventional attacks on these cyber nodes. So the U.S. military is thinking about this really deeply. The Navy is working on a concept that they call distributed lethality, which is an idea that are able to function within a contested domain. The Army is actually integrating cyberspace offensive operations, like they're having to do cyberspace defense within their exercises. So the Army is thinking very much about, what do I do if my infantry unit no longer has access to networks? Now the Army response is, oh cool, it didn't work in the first place. This isn't that big But I hate to say this because my background was the Air Force, but I think the Air Force is probably the latest to this game and has built giant weapon systems that are extraordinarily dependent on having digital dominance. And I think the Air Force is going to have to think really hard about how they think about transferring information. So the way they process information is they centralize it within what they call the distributed common ground system. So they take all this information and then they put it in 4 locations, which is extraordinarily vulnerable to cyber attack or conventional attack. So I think all the services are minus maybe the Air Force, are thinking about this in a more complete way. And I think we're going to see some pretty large transformations in the way the U.S. thinks about doing war. The big question will be whether it ends up affecting what we buy. Because those are really long-term decisions, and those are embedded within organizational cultures.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the program tonight. We're all out, and there's still a bunch of hands up. I'm really sorry about that, because I've got a bunch more questions too. I might trap you, not you. A couple of things before we break. On Wednesday at noon, I believe, we were having a program over in the Tower Center across campus, simply titled Trump and Russia. Much to discuss, so come by if you can. Also on May 3rd and 4th, we're having our annual Sun and Star Conference. This year will be on the U.S.-Japan alliance. Notice the future of that alliance that came up in the conversation tonight. We're going to be digging in for a couple of days with a series of U.S. officials, Japanese officials, and scholars from both countries. So if you haven't signed up for the Sun and Star Conference, please do. You can go on the Tower Center website and RSVP for that event as well, or come down and talk to me and I can answer any of your questions. So with that, it just leaves me to thank you all for attending tonight's marvelous discussion and thank our speakers, Dr. Cheung.